Okay, guys, welcome to the first episode of For Wales, See Wales. It is happening. We have got a topical podcast. We've talked about this for weeks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
and now it's happening. First things first, on the off chance that the people listening don't know who we are, which obviously means they're incredibly uninformed, who are you and why have you decided to do this? Let's start with you, I want to say Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin Morgan. I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm a writer, and I am now a co-host of a podcast. Very, very excited. This podcast should be great. Shine a spotlight on Wales and on why it matters.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Mel Owen, and I'm also a stand-up comedian and a writer, but I'm about 10 years behind Robin. And
You can say younger, that's fine. That's okay.
I'm behind. and that will show in the podcast. And I'm so excited, to do this because, I mean, obviously the premise is that there aren't many just Wales politics-focused programmes or podcasts, and the fact that we're doing this, be the change you want to see. Somebody really wise said that, and I'm now going to claim it.
It was Will Hayward.
It was. He is incredibly wise. So I am he. My name's Will Hayward, and I am a journalist and author. I primarily cover Welsh politics and Welsh issues. But I think the reason, we actually have discussed this for about a year, haven't we, doing this? And it comes from, I think, a frustration that there doesn't seem to be, there's some really good coverage of Welsh issues, but there doesn't seem to be enough to counter the fact that Wales is, I think, I want to say afterthought, but often it's not even a thought, is it? In like
so
wider
true.
UK media. And I think that's, as someone who lives in Wales, I'm almost at the point where I can call myself Welsh. I've been here 17 years.
I think we're going to allow it. We'll allow it, yeah?
Yeah. We'll allow it like we're judges in this in the court of Welshness.
The immigration panel. But there, he's in. He's in.
So was there a point that anything like in like recently that you kind of has summed up the challenges we've had? I know some of you mentioned like the Vaughan Gething resignation coverage, for instance.
That was the big one for me when it was like the same day as Gareth Southgate standing down, and that was giving something like 15 minutes on the news, and then Vaughan Gething was mentioned fourth. And, I know it's Welsh news, but Wales is in the UK at the moment. That is how it is. And the fact that I think that if that had been Scottish news, I think that would have been at least second. It might not have become before Gareth Southgate, but it would have been at least second. Whereas in the UK coverage, it was just such a non-event. And the fact of the matter is, he was like the first black leader in Europe. Like that was a thing. And I don't think the UK coverage of that was very great either. So that for me was like such a throwing something at the TV, frustrating kind of day.
Yeah, totally. I think, firstly, I want to pick up one thing you said, which was Wales is part of the UK for now.
Just slipping it in.
Yeah, I know, absolutely.
Little Easter egg there for the listeners.
Teasing a future storyline.
Aberystwyth Welsh-speaking Mel is definitely appeal to that side of our audience, isn't she?
Absolutely. I think, the VG stuff was very, very interesting, wasn't it? I think for me, and I think probably for quite a lot of people in Wales, I think the COVID years, that was very, very interesting to see. The bits of the Welsh Government that had devolved and how much, impact that had on us as in Wales during that point, but also all of the, the Boris speeches and all of the UK government plans that then clearly was not explained to anybody that this bit is devolved. I think that was very interesting for me to see the I suppose ignorance and I know from my own point of view as well, seeing which bits of Wales are governed by the Welsh Government. I think I found that very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think the whole Vaughan Gething, I'm going to say saga, I can call that a saga. I think that really solidified for me why I wanted to do something like this, because not only was it the fact that when he resigned it wasn't big news, and I can get it from a journalistic perspective. There are probably more people in the UK interested in Gareth Southgate stepping down than interested in Vaughan Gething stepping down. But the first thing I'd say is if that had been Nicola Sturgeon, that probably wouldn't have been bumped for Gareth Southgate. The other thing I'd say, from the very beginning, there was a real scandal around Vaughan Gething, and however you feel about him and how his leadership panned out, if that had been any other part of the UK that a Labour leader had been mired in that kind of controversy, elements of a London media would have been all over it.
Well, look at the Taylor Swift ticket stuff, which is like mild in comparison to what Vaughan Gething did. And Keir Starmer's been absolutely dragged for all the claiming and the gifts and all of that, which it's nowhere near kind of the dodginess of what Vaughan Gething did.
No, I think Taylor Swift environmentally is quite poor as well.
Very true. Yeah.
Let's get the Swifties
Get
annoyed.
that private jet to the kitchen. Yeah, you piss off the Swifties in episode 1, Robin.
And hey, it'll get some listenership, get some eyeballs on the pod.
It was that thing about Vaughan Gething. The right of the media in London couldn't even be bothered to use it as a stick to beat Labour with.
No,
That's
they
how
just
much an
did
afterthought
not
it
care.
was. Yeah, I think with Welsh coverage, and we're going to come on to this with the first thing we're going to talk about, which is Whisper at 20 miles an hour. The frustration, I think, that with how people cover that is everything in Wales, when it's covered in a UK perspective, is covered through a UK lens, which is actually understandable because you're talking for a wider audience. But if you talk about things like 20 miles an hour, it's all about how will this be brought in England? How will this affect Labour's chances in the general election? When you talk about COVID, it was always done as a juxtaposition against Boris Johnson. It's very rarely that Welsh issues are scrutinised for their own sake. So that's what we're hoping to do, but hopefully in an accessible, interesting, and I mean, this is on YouTube, a funny way.
We'll try. We will try,
Just
yeah.
a cool and sexy way.
Are you the cool and I'm the sexy?
yeah. I think so.
I might be and. Right.
Yeah, you did introduce yourself as "I am he" at the start, which I really like. Oh, wow.
I loved it for you.
Yeah.
I love the ego. I do.
So we're going to start with 20 miles an hour in Wales. So that got brought in September of last year, 2023. And it was one of those things that sort of like really cut through, didn't it? Sort of like it bled into sort of like UK media. Everyone was talking about it. Your nan, your dog, separate things. Will, context. How did it come about?
So this was in the Welsh Labour manifesto in 2021, and Welsh Labour loved to use that as the justification. It was in our manifesto, you can't complain.
That everybody reads, obviously.
I know Labour councillors who don't read their own manifesto. So the idea was, now contrary to what Andrew R.T. Davies, the Welsh Tory leader, said, this wasn't a blanket introduction of 20 miles an hour. What it meant was every single 30 mile an hour limit in Wales would default to 20 miles an hour unless it was exempted. And there was quite a few exemptions. So essentially major arterial roads, which makes sense to be 30 miles an hour, would be not go down to 20, but everything would, as default, go down to 20 unless exempted. And the reason they did this is because there's really strong evidence to suggest that if you lower the speeds, you massively increase the likelihood of people surviving accidents and decrease the amount of accidents. So this was the justification for it. And people absolutely lost their minds, didn't they?
It was crazy. Like, I almost didn't understand what was so divisive about it. You know, when you're like, have I missed something? And, you know, when you go through a 20 mile an hour zone, don't get me wrong, it does feel so slow. It does feel really slow.
It is annoying sometimes,
it is, yeah. When you're like really trying to stick to it, it is hard. But then, you know, it's really difficult. On one hand, you got, well, do you want children to die? Is that what you want? Is that what you... And you're like, well, no, but I'm also saying that. And it's very difficult because I think on the one hand, I felt like such a city wanker, honestly, at the time. I was there like, I don't think it even matters that much because I lived in Cardiff where you can't really drive over 20 mile an hour anywhere, to be honest. But then when you go out into the countryside where it is up and down, it is irritating. So yeah, far be it for me to sit on a fence, and it won't happen often. So I make the most of it. But I really just don't know what was for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, those. I think I was exactly the same as you. In my, you know, there's a road near my house that used to be 30, now down to 20, and it does seem slow. And they always put mobile speed cameras there as well now. So then I'm like, oh, I will do it.
Yeah, I better do it.
But it didn't annoy me that much. Like, you know, you hear a lot of people complaining about it. I loved seeing the discourse of it's going to break everyone's cars. The engines can't cope with it. My car shouldn't be in second gear. I'm sorry, you're all mechanics now. You all understand the mechanics of cars immediately, do you? I love that. But the countries that, you know, gigging around Wales and stuff, so some roads, or obviously it hasn't worked on those because it does go 60, 40, 30, 20, 40, 60, whatever. But in theory, those ones will be, the council or people could apply to change those to make it more uniform, right? Because I think the rationale behind it, saving people's lives, reducing accidents, economically, that makes so much sense as well. But the rollout seemed quite... I think and I think Lee Waters has said this now, right? The communication behind it wasn't the best. But people hate change, and B, people love driving. They love driving and they love driving fast. And I think, and there was brilliant interviews where people were first interviewed about seatbelts being brought in, and you or like people outside pubs, and they're like, "Yeah, I've had £5, and now I feel completely in control of my vehicle."
And now it just wouldn't be a thing.
Wild. And obviously
Yeah.
you think that, okay, now it's probably sensible
Yeah.
to have seatbelts and not have £5. And also the cigarette lighters in cars. That now the USB chargers are still the same size of
Yeah.
that, where you used to sort of like light a fag in the
The
car.
amount of times I've burnt myself in one of those. You
Yeah,
ever just
yeah.
like, you'd put it in, it would be red hot. Maybe this is just a me thing. I'd be like, I just needed to touch myself with it and then cry that I'd burnt myself.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Have to go for a quick 80-mile-an-hour drive just to calm down. Yeah.
But it was just so divisive. But I think what came from it was that it did push Wales into like the UK narrative of like, oh, can you believe what's happening in Wales? Which I don't hate.
I got like heckled at gigs. Like when I used to say like I'm from Wales. At one point at the comedy store, someone shouted 20 mile an hour.
That's better than Cheap Shago, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that was the same night as well.
Great, cool. Yeah.
It was 2 shows, early show, late show. Yeah. No, wild. It really did cut through, and I think, which bizarrely in London, where all of it is 20 mile an hour.
If that, yeah. They're like, oh, look at you, you fools. As
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
going 8 mile an hour
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
You haven't
exactly.
moved for 20 minutes.
One of those little like modern horse and carts things with like Tiesto blaring out of the back.
I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because especially if you live rurally and your public transport is crap. It's rubbish.
Yeah.
You get a train once an hour. Sometimes it doesn't show up. Sometimes it's completely full. The buses to where you live have been cancelled or massively come back. I can totally understand why you would be legitimately really annoyed that your only realistic means of transport is now being curtailed and made harder. I can totally get that. And don't get me wrong, I find the 20-mile limit on certain roads incredibly annoying. I think what is worth doing, though, is looking at what the result has been. So the data, at the moment, we have essentially 6 months worth of data because it's quite far behind where we are now. So we have the last 3 months of 2023, and we have the first 3 months of 2024. So what we can do is we can compare those roads a year before it came in with now. And I'll give you some of the figures. So the total number of casualties has dropped by a quarter. So it's down from 510 to 377. So down by a quarter. Obviously, there's all sorts of things that can play into that. It could have been a colder month the year before. There could have been more people driving. There's lots of things that could play into that. But it's a good sign. The total killed has gone down 55%. Now, they are small numbers. So it's gone down from 11 to 5. Now, that isn't enough to say, oh my gosh, this is working, but it's all we've got at the moment as a sign. The other interesting thing is slight injuries are down from 27%, so from 409 down to just under 300. Now, the thing with this is, obviously, as I say, these are just indicative, but there is actually from like, not just the human perspective of this, because obviously even a slight injury, I wouldn't like to be slightly injured by a car.
It's not an ideal Monday, is it?
It's not an ideal Monday, and it might mean that for a week I can't go to work, I can't care for a loved one, I might not be able to take my kids to school. It plays into a lot of stuff, but from a purely financial perspective, actually, it's really, really, really cost effective. So car accidents are crazy expensive, from lack of productivity in the economy that they create to health issues. So people going to the NHS, you have a pile up on a major road, local hospital, that costs a lot of money. That's a big problem. But also from that road being closed, all sorts of stuff. The police time, it's very expensive. So the UK government estimates that every fatal accident on average costs 2.2 million. So every time someone dies, that's 2.2 million. Sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less. That's just on average. A serious injury is about 250,000, 252,000. Really, really big numbers.
How do we monetize this?
I'm like, I'm such a narcissist. The way I went, I hope mine's 2 million. I hope mine's more.
Mine's going to be real glam. Real glitz and glam.
I want a really cost estate when I die. 100%.
Even a slight injury is about 20 grand. So I added up, just using these, again, before everyone ats me on X, or wherever they come at me.
Shout out to X.
Shout out to X, yeah.
Favourite platform.
Yeah, the Musketeer has done some amazing stuff on there. So there's been 6 fewer fatals. That saved £13.5 million. 17 fewer serious accidents. That's £4.3 million. 110 fewer I say mild accidents, slight injuries, that's £2.1 million. So that's a saving of about 20 million in a quarter, in 3 months. And I think everything is weighing up, isn't it? Obviously, if you wanted to have no car accident, you shut the M4. We're not going to do that because everything is a balance, isn't it? Like, it's a balance of what we want and what we need to what would kind of work. And I actually think this is starting to strike, potentially, I would suggest that those figures make a fairly strong case for it. But obviously, some people, I mean, some of the protests, so I covered the protests for this. And my favourite thing about the protests were people were annoyed that they were driving too slow. So they did a drive slow on the M4 to protest it.
So meta, and I'm here for it. That is so ironic.
Fantastic. And people were annoyed about how much it cost to produce all the signs. So they vandalised the signs. So they had to make more signs. And I kind of respect it. But also, I'd respect it more if they weren't just abusing me online constly for pointing out these figures.
I respect them for that, actually. I quite like that. I go through favourite all the ones to call you an knob. I love it.
Yeah, well, I go through and I'm like, Dad, Auntie.
A lot of them of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Me and Mel have been doing it all morning.
Yeah.
It was you guys. I knew it was.
I was driving to Aberystwyth this weekend and I thought I saw a defaced sign on one of the roads, and I realised it was outside a school, and it was one of those ones where they get the kids to design the 20, and the 20 is with a dragon.
Yes.
But I'll be honest.
So it was just little Jimmy.
Little Jimmy, who is not a good artist.
Yeah. Pursue something else.
Yeah.
Maybe academia, because this ain't for you, Jim.
And it feels like, I understand the whole thing of like there's a school here and it's going to grab your attention, but let's maybe not change the road. The road sounds are quite important.
Yeah, I kind of need to know what they say. I know exactly the ones you mean, because I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, exactly.
What's going on?
What? And then you crash.
Yeah.
Bye, Jimmy. 2.2 million.
I don't want to go too far down the 20-mile-an-hour rabbit hole because it is just an endless thing we can discuss. But I think there's a few things to say on public opinion on it in Wales. Polls do suggest that most people in Wales don't like it. It's not a popular policy. People aren't in favour of it. But I also think you can look at it and realise that actually some of the opposition has been exaggerated. That isn't to say there isn't opposition, but take that 500,000 people who signed that petition on the Welsh Government website against it. 500,000. I mean, there's only 3 million in Wales. That is a crazy high number, isn't it?
Like, do enough people care about it that it would change the way they vote?
Well,
does it?
It doesn't necessarily change. You don't necessarily vote on the 20 miles an hour, but you might think those people have annoyed me, and it's very hard to bring that back as a politician.
I think it will be spoken about on the doorstep in 2 years.
100%. But interestingly, with that petition, to sign that petition, all you needed to do was have a Welsh postcode. And we saw a massive spike in Google searches for Welsh postcodes when that was happening, like a huge spike, which I would tentatively suggest that maybe some people outside of Wales were signing that petition when they don't necessarily have a direct vested interest.
Don't tentatively suggest it, back it up. Yeah. We know exactly what happened. It's giving second home. That is what it is giving.
I tell you what, I'll give you an even better example. So I did this investigation in January last year. I went through, there's some Facebook groups which are very, very, very anti-20 miles an hour. There was anti-20 miles an hour North Wales, anti-20 miles an hour West Wales, South East Wales, Mid Wales.
All of Wales?
Yeah, all of Wales, I know. And I had a little look at who was running them. And long story short, the common administrator on all of this was a Conservative councillor from Sunderland. Okay, his name was Lyle Reid. And Lyle, yeah. Sure. And to be fair, Lyle is a political animal. He he's very passionate about 20 miles an hour in Wales. So although he's a Sunderland councillor, he was an admin on all these.
Is he Welsh?
No. From what I can tell, I did approach him for comment. Don't think he is Welsh. Lyle is so passionate about 20 miles an hour. In Sunderland, he's actually campaigned for 20 miles an hour where he lives. So just to be clear, I need to just make it put forward what their comment was. So Mr. Reid was actually apparently helping other Conservative members in Wales manage the Facebook group. So he says he didn't have an active role in it. So I'm just putting forward his point of view. But I think it's worth saying that there was a massive political expedience for certain areas of our politics to make this issue as divisive as possible, which obviously applies to almost everything.
But also there was that whole, it's a blanket ban, it's not a blanket ban. And that as a term was just, I mean, it was clever from the Tories the way they did it, because everyone was going, yeah, it's a blanket ban.
Well,
it
Sunak
is.
jumped on it.
Yeah,
Like, the
100%.
Prime
But
Minister
Also,
jumped
what's
on
he
it.
banning? It's not even a
Yeah,
ban.
it's not
They said
banning
it's a
it.
blanket ban. It doesn't ban anything.
But it was a clever quip, and it worked.
Oh, it
because
did.
the public were using it. Well, I don't like it because it's a blanket ban.
100%.
You know, and that, you know, as political messaging goes, it gained traction.
100%.
But Lyle, I mean, some people need hobbies, and you know, and if you like it in your area, but you've just decided, do you know what it's giving? Colonization. That you're coming over here and you're deciding the rules that we're going to live by, but you don't even live here. You care about Sunderland. I'm not going to go to Sunderland and start announcing what they're allowed to do and what they're not.
You can take the girl out of Ceredigion.
Exactly. It's giving oppression.
Okay.
I loved the phrase blanket ban because it sounds like you're banning little ladies'
Blankets.
blankets. It's really sweet.
Snowflakes.
Really enjoyed that. Also, the idea that his justification that he's just helping other members out by managing the Facebook group. No one wants the admin to manage a Facebook group. No one wants that on your CV. That's absolutely insane.
I mean, I'm always loath to when I name individuals, especially so I'm aware that quite often there can be a bit of a pile on, and I am quite loath to do it. But I think sometimes you do just have to point out where people's affiliations lie when they're making these comments. And maybe he's very passionate about 20 miles an hour in Wales, but I think it's worth pointing out that he was associated with a particular political party, and so were the other administrators. It wasn't just him. All of those administrators I could point out and say they were linked to the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and also, nobody wants to cause a pile-on of anybody, but there also is accountability for somebody's actions. And if you've just described what they've done and that causes outrage, that is on them.
Okay. And 100%. Yeah. We need to move on because literally we are going at 20 miles an hour through this one. But
love that segue, Will. You're getting good at this.
But what
I wrote that for him.
Did you? Yeah, fair enough.
have this. That's like the one joke I might ever do. You could just let me have this. It is worth pointing out that Lee Waters, the guy who brought in this policy, former Welsh Government minister, still a Welsh Labour MS, has said that he thinks that there's a big risk that we will actually undermine the policy because the Welsh Government have essentially talked it down ever since they brought it in. And as I understand it, the latest TomTom data suggests that speeds are now going up. If I was to say to you guys, Welsh Labour have abandoned their gender quota law, would you know really what I was talking about?
No, I wouldn't, actually, to be honest.
Now, that kind of hurts, Mel, because that suggests to me you don't subscribe to my newsletter.
I don't. Well, I see enough of you, to be honest. I mark it as junk. I'm not going to lie. I don't even sign up. You're still sending it to me.
Yeah.
You know?
He posted it through my letterbox.
Paper copy.
Handwritten, which I thought was quite sweet.
I can't believe that I'm giving up my time to do this.
Please tell me more opinions that I haven't asked for.
For Wales, see Will Hayward looking sad.
No,
Well.
please do tell me. Please tell me. No, I want you to feel good about this. Please tell me.
You want me to feel good about Labour abandoning the gender quotas?
Please do.
Right, okay. Right, so stay with me because this is important, but it is also quite dry legislative chat. But stay with me. It's worth it. It's going to be good. It's got a great finish. So basically, it is clearly a good thing to have a equal distribution of men and women in parliaments, not just from the point of view of women actually make up more than 50% of the population, so it's just fair to have that representation, but also parliaments with more women tend to be better in terms of the policies they deliver. So they are more likely, if you've got a good gender split in a parliament, it's more likely to have more cross-party working. It's more likely to tackle issues which affect women, things like childcare. And stuff like that. And it is essentially the way that the discourse tends to work, just tends to be better. So let me give you an example. In Norway, better childcare was linked to having a gender equal parliament, like better childcare. But in India, more water projects, drinking water projects, were linked to having more female representation in parliament. So it is a good thing. And people recognise it as a good thing. So the Welsh Labour government thought, let's make this happen in a way that it has to be the case. So they brought in this thing called gender quotas. So what this would, in a nutshell, this would mean that at Senedd elections, you would have every other candidate would be a woman. So that would mean that when you elect it on these lists, half of the parliament would be women. And that would be a really, really good thing. That was the argument. Now, there was some opposition to this, saying that it should be more of a meritocracy, and doing stuff like this isn't a good way to do it. But ultimately, this is what they decided to do. And they were really, really keen on this. Really, really keen. And this was part of the policy. It got voted through with the Senedd expansion. It was a separate piece of legislation, but it came in. It was part of that. And because of the gender quotas, that's why Plaid Cymru supported Labour to get this through. However, back in July, they decided that they weren't going to bring this in 2026. They said, we're not going to do it in 2026. We're going to kick it into the long grass, essentially, and we're going to do it in 2030. So in 2030, we're going to bring this in. And there was a lot of concern then, because people were like, well, why are you waiting? And the reason that they were waiting is because they weren't sure if the Welsh Government even had the power to do this. Because is this something that only the UK government can do? Is it something the Welsh Government can do? And they were worried it would be challenged in courts. So Plaid and the Labour MSs were like, OK, fine, we'd rather it came in now, but we'll wait till 2030. That's fine. But the key thing here is Labour was still massively behind this. 2 months ago, they were massively behind it. Jane Hutt, who was the government minister who was introducing it, literally said in the Senedd, this legislation is groundbreaking. No one else in the UK is doing this. So they're really behind it. Now, last week, on the 24th of September, so a couple of weeks ago, the Welsh Government opted just to ditch the bill completely. They said, we're not going to do this now. We think there's a better way to do it. When it was announced, they said that the First Minister, Elena Morgan, had said, actually, we're not going to prioritise this. What we're going to do is have parties do this voluntarily. We're going to ask parties to do it. There's no law for them to do it. This was seen as a really, by some of Labour's own Senedd members, as a really, really sad thing. Why aren't they doing it? And it begs the question, what's changed? So what has changed between July, when this was a really good policy, to now, when they've decided not to? Now, there's two things it could be. It could be that the new First Minister simply doesn't prioritise it. Now, I personally think it'd be quite weird for the first female First Minister to be one of her first acts to say, no, I'm not actually fussed about gender quotas. Yeah. She doesn't strike me as a drawbridge pull-upper.
No, not at all.
Exactly. And so the other option is that Labour in Westminster don't back it. So that is one thing that has changed, that we now have a Labour government who don't support this policy. And that raises quite a lot of questions, because the idea that the UK government could interfere in which is essentially how Wales government is elected, that idea that it's essentially been vetoed by Keir Starmer in London, I think is quite a serious point, because not only is it from the point of view of more female representation an issue, it also suggests that Welsh Labour and UK Labour aren't really separate in any meaningful way. I think that is a concern. So I went to the Welsh Government and I said, what conversations you had with Labour regarding the decision to drop the policy, and what's changed since July? And they came back and said, essentially, the First Minister, while meeting people across Wales over the summer, has reflected and taken a decision to address the issues in a different way. What they also said was that after 2026, they're going to take stock and look at it again. So after the next election, they'll look at it again. But the problem is, they might not even be in government then. And I think the thing that says to me that Welsh Labour don't really want to do this, that they've been forced into the position, is the reaction of some members of their own party. So I'm going to play you a statement from Joyce Watson. So if we have a look on the screen, we'll be able to see what Joyce Watson said about this issue.
Deeply disappointed that we are where we are today. I think we should have done some checks and balances on whether it was going to see the passage that we would hope that it would arrive at and would become policy. I was deeply concerned that we would end up where we are today. I said it on several occasions, and here we are. So it's with a heavy heart that I will support what the government has put through, but I will ask the government in future, any government in future, not to do what I believe we've done, and that is raise.
Now, that's Joyce Watson with her not the quickest style of oratory, but I think what you can say there is that she is very upset.
Yeah, you can hear that. Yeah.
You can hear, and there's several other, especially female Labour MSs, who are very clearly upset about it. Firstly, were you guys aware of this at all? Because I don't think this cuts through into wider Wales at all.
No, I wasn't, were you?
I'd seen little bits of it, I think, because it was around the time that I think, if it was July, then Vaughan Gething's government was sort of dropping a few policies left, right and centre, weren't they? And I think it was in a package of those sort of, they were distancing themselves from 20 mile an hour, they were distancing themselves from a lot of Drakeford policies. But yeah, I found it interesting that when Elena took over, this was one of the first things to go. The UK thing is really interesting, but it feels like if they're going to take stock after 2026, is that just they don't want to give voters any other reason to not vote for them? Is
It's
this
the
just
panic, isn't it, almost?
It feels like it's that where they don't want another thing of, oh look, they've made us all drive 20 mile an hour and now they're forcing women politicians on us. It feels like they're sort of just cowering down and just hoping for the best ahead of the new election.
Yeah, I think at the moment they're like Labour in Wales essentially just don't have any oomph, any drive. They're not willing to just grasp the nettle on stuff, and I think that's part of why also they can't stand up to the UK party. But the biggest thing with this is the gender quotas was used as the justification for the new Senedd system. So at the next election, we've got an expanded Senedd, so there'll be 96 MSs instead of 60. So that's a big expansion. But they're not going to be elected. You know, normally you go in and you have a list and you've got Mr. Jones, Labour, Mr. whatever, Clyde, Mr. Jones, yeah. You've got that. That won't be there this time. There will just be the names of the parties. It'll be Labour, Tories, Reform. And the reason they've done this is they've done this thing called a closed list system. So what the parties will do, they will give a list of people and they will, and there'll be 6 candidates for each area. So say Labour got, for ease of maths, 50% of the vote there. They would get their first 3 candidates. But there's some issues with this because firstly, you can't vote for an individual MS. You are voting for a party. And the issue with that is you can't, we've got some Senedd members at the moment who have been, a Senedd member who's been investigated by the police. Yeah. If you wanted to remove that person, you can't. You just vote for the party. If the party decides to put that person top of their list, nothing you can do about it. But Labour have shot themselves in the foot here because what Labour do have is name recognition. They've got a lot of members who people know in their local community. They might not like Labour, but they like, as we say, Mr. Jones, etc. So this is a massive gift for reform because there's going to be an election where Labour are in power in Cardiff, Labour are in power in Westminster. And when you look at your ballot paper, you're not going to see the name you know, you're just going to see Labour, well, Welsh Labour. And I think they've really shot themselves in the foot with this.
This seems mental because there is such a lack of engagement in Welsh politics as it is with like the general voters, general public. So then why are we then taking away another thing that they could possibly engage with? Like you say, they might not really know the difference between the Conservatives and Plaid and the Labour candidates, but they'll know, oh, I like that man because he helped me with this, or I've seen him on the doorstep. And so they're taking that away. So it's even less for the Welsh voters to engage with. That seems, I don't understand there must have been a committee somewhere. They've all gone, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, what's the rationale behind it?
Well, the rationale, that's a really point. Well, the reason that it got voted through by MSs is because it was a way to do those gender quotas, which they're not now even doing. Wow. But the people who really supported this was UK Labour. Welsh Labour didn't want this. The MPs wanted it. The MSs didn't. Now, why do the MPs want it? Because it gives the party much more control. You can't be a kind of maverick, free-thinking politician on a closed list system because nobody votes for you directly. They vote for the party. So if you annoy the leadership of the party, they can just put you at the bottom of the list.
This is ringing serious alarm bells, especially for if for as long as there is Labour in Westminster and Labour in the Senedd. That is such a worrying trait.
Yeah, well, it's that thing. If this was the Tories, people would be like, oh, this is awful. This is all about centralisation of power. And what it essentially means is you end up with lots of yes politicians.
Well, you saw this within UK when Starmer was selecting his UK MP lists and people were getting sort of dropped, Diane Abbott and stuff, having to sort of fight back and make sure that she was going to stand in Hackney because, he was trying to root out the Corbynites, wasn't he? Yeah. So I think You know, that's incredibly worrying that there's not sort of like personal accountability for MSs. For example, if something, you know, they do something horrible and we can't, as voters, we can't get them out. But also, yeah, in terms of, as you say, the centralisation of Labour just picking the people who are just going to say yes, it ruins any kind of, oomph and ideas within politics.
Going back on devolution.
Yeah.
It's very much centralising where the power is, and it won't just be Labour. Every single party will now be able to do this. So,
but it's going to be good for reform. I mean, like when you look at sort of the people who, you know, the MPs that they were putting up, you know, you wouldn't recognise any of those names. But reform as a brand is really strong. And obviously, if Labour want to sort of, Labour's brand is fine.
And they'll think there will be a lot of voters out there who want to vote for Nigel Farage. Yeah. At the end of the day, even if he's not standing where they are, there will be people who are like, I want to vote for Farage. So they'll vote for reform, just not the Labour or the Conservative or the Plaid member who's in their area who might have already been there for 20 years.
Do you know what sums this up? There's only ever been one closed list system vote in Wales before, and that was in 2019. It was the last European election before we properly left the EU.
So we've left the EU. No
one mentioned.
What?
Breaking news.
Happen?
Take that in the
big story. You wouldn't read it anyway. So 2019, the only time there was a closed list election, and the Brexit Party won 19 of the 22 councils in Wales. So this is an absolute gift for Nigel Farage.
I feel like we have to address like the whole quotas argument though, because there will be people who kind of recoil at the thought of a quota. And I think I can understand that. And I definitely would have been that person at one point in life when I was like much younger. I was like, no, I want to be chosen on merit. I want to be chosen because I'm the best candidate for the job. And then the world happened to me and I went out and I lived an adult life and I realised that's not how the world works. And unfortunately, until women have to prove themselves so much harder, and then there's all sorts of elements of intersectionality, like if you're a woman of colour or you're disabled or you're gay, there are other things you then have to prove. And unfortunately, we're not in a place as a society where people do trust those people, even in stand-up. Do you know what I mean? You get like, 100%. I've had people genuinely, I'll come out, I wouldn't have said a word yet, and there'll be people like, for God's sake, because I'm a woman, and that is a very real thing.
I've had female acts, if I'm compering and about to bring a female act on, they will say, can you not say your next act, she is so brilliant, that kind of thing, because I've done it before, and you can see 100% of the time men. Yeah. Actually, no, that's unfair. Yeah. So usually men then just sort of like immediately folding their arms and sort of checking out of the gig. But when I used to work behind the bar of a comedy club, I used to have women sort of like say, oh, we don't really like women comedians to me. So I think it's unfair of me to say it's just men doing that, because I think it is this idea within comedy that's still...
Because society's told them not to trust other women. And, you know, I think it is, you know, it will tend to be older women because they came from a generation where they weren't listened to either. And, you know, so that's just internalized misogyny. But we are at a place still, unfortunately, in our society where we do need quotas. There are many jobs I would not have got if they didn't need a brown person and a woman. And then I have to go and be great at it. And they're like, oh, thank God we got her. Yeah. But
it's so much greater than a white male counterpart.
100%. Well. You have to be 150% better. You can't have a bad day. You can't make a single mistake. And that's the reality.
I have been watching you like a hawk, actually, to make sure.
Waiting for me to slip up. But you just can't. And the same, I think it's probably even worse for female politicians. I mean, like, look, the way that Diane Abbott was treated, I mean, within her own party, it's such a scourge on Labour in the way she was treated. And this really, I think, is worrying. And it's such a shame that it happened in Eluned Morgan's time as well, like literally in the first couple of months. And I don't, like you say, she just doesn't seem the type to be like, well, I'm here now, sod the rest of you. It feels like something that probably would have been forced on her.
Cool. And I think it sums it up that you guys are in the kind of bell curve of people in Wales. You're probably some of the people who are more politically engaged and weren't necessarily completely across what was happening. So I think that sums up why talking about this is really important. Guys, this has been awesome. It's been nice just chatting with my mates about Welsh politics. And like, hopefully other people care.
I didn't have to pay us to do it with you this time either. Yeah.
Hang on, this dynamic can't continue. This can't just be ribbing on Hayward, who talks about himself in the third person, so probably deserves to be mocked.
Yeah, you don't help yourself.
So next week, we're going to get into a bit of a groove. Later this week, I'm going to the Plaid Cymru conference.
Congratulations.
I know. Ooh.
Where is it this year?
It's in Cardiff. I know. For Wales, see Cardiff. Am I right? People on Twitter.
Am I right?
But so hopefully get some interviews that we can talk about there. And I think what we said would be quite cool is each week we'll do a little dive into each of the parties, talk about, we'll pick a different one each week. But I think the most important thing is if anyone's got anything they want us to look at, because ultimately we aren't just three people getting in a room and chatting for ourselves. We want this to be something that informs people. And so if you've got topics, issues that you think deserve attention, we'd appeal for listeners to give us a
even
shout.
really localized ones as
Yeah.
well. I want to talk about speed bumps, please.
Yeah.
I want to talk about
100%.
potholes.
So if they want to get in touch, we've got a TikTok, we've got an Instagram. We didn't do an X because life's too short.
Yeah, it's a bin fire, isn't it? Although there was a very wound up resident of Wrexham, the Prince of Wrexham. What do you call himself? The Marxist of Wrexham.
The Socialist Republic of Wrexham.
He was really annoyed with us before we even launched because we were going to be too Cardiff focused, which is impressive considering we hadn't even done an episode.
And we recorded in Newport.
Yeah,
to be fair, maybe we are South Wales
do you know
focused.
what? I've always said this, that if there's a town who's not, or city that's not getting enough attention at the moment in Wales, it's Wrexham.
Yeah,
It's Wrexham.
Is anything going on in Wrexham at the moment?
Nobody ever discusses Wrexham.
Yeah.
So where can people find you on socials, guys?
Oh, Mel Owen Comedy on everything.
I'm Robin J. Morgan on everything except X, which is Robin J. A. Y. Morgan, because there's already a Robin J. Morgan who's also a white man with glasses.
Oh,
and
no!
people, I think, follow him. He once got me pulled out of a gig because they tagged in Robin J. Morgan, and he replied saying, "Can't make it tonight, guys. I've got the shits." And I turned up to the gig, and they were like, "We thought you were ill," and I was like, "No." And then I had to drive home.
Well played.
There's actually a Will Hayward who is an Australian rules footballer in
That's who I
Australia.
thought I was working with.
Yeah, and it's annoying because he looks a little bit like me, but he's just tall, muscly, and handsomer. You can find me on the socials.
No one asked. Will, I'm joking.
This is completely going to prove the Lord of Wrexham right, but I'm at Will Hay Cardiff on Twitter.
Oh, no.
You can also find me as Will Hayward on Instagram. I think I'm Will Hayward Journal on Instagram and Will Hayward on TikTok. Also, want to finish with another shout out to HayMan Media. These guys are based in Newport. They do podcasts, they do video, they do pictures. They are amazing. I've worked with a few of these guys before when I worked in a previous job, and they're the best in the business at telling stories digitally.
They are fantastic. We also want to work with more fantastic sponsors.
Yes.
Crucially, don't we?
We could be drinking, eating, or holding your company's product here while Mel and Robin insult me. Right, this has been For Wales, See Wales. My name is Will Hayward.
My name is Robin Morgan.
And my name is Mel Owen.
This has been a HayMan Media production, and thank you so much for joining us.